All right, guys, we are live. MMA Joey is joining the conversation, and we're going to be breaking down UFC 290. All right, so we're a couple hours out from the press conference. MMA Joey, the first thing I have to ask is, how do you think the press conference is going to be? And then after that, how do you rate UFC 290 as a whole? Like, what are you thinking about this card on a scale of 1 to 10? I know you make a video series rating the card. So what would you rate UFC 290?
So as far as the press conference, I've always felt this way about pretty much every press conference. I just don't care about the press conferences. Like, best case scenario, you get a bunch of grown men shouting at each other from across the, you know what I mean? From across the stage. Maybe somebody stands up and says, "Don't talk about my mother," or, like the Michael Chiesa thing from years ago. So I literally I try to tune into some of the pressers just because in case there's something interesting. But every time I do, I'm like, I regret this. What a waste of time. And then half the time they're 30 minutes late too. So it's even worse, even more of a waste of time. But as far as the card, I love the card. It's a little bit disappointing, the fights that have fallen off, like on the prelims, basically. The Sean Brady, Jack Della Maddalena fight. Christian Rodriguez versus Cameron Simon was a really good fight that was on the prelims as well. And then originally Figgy versus Manel Kape. But overall, the co-main and main, I think they're being vastly underrated. They're that good of fights. For me, I understand the whole MMA community, and I don't know, you'll have to tell me your opinion. The whole MMA community loves fights like, maybe Jones, Stipe, or something like that. For me, Volkanovski versus Yair is a better fight. I love that fight so much. And then the Moreno-Pantoja fight is incredible. I know it would never headline a pay-per-view on its own, but for my own personal preference, it could be a headliner, if that makes sense.
I agree. I completely agree. To answer your first point, there are so many fights that have fell off. Thank God that we still have all of these guys on the card. For example, like Cameron Simon versus Christian Rodriguez. That was an excellent fight. Christian Rodriguez coming off of a good win over Raul Rosas Jr. And of course, we have, Bo Nickel now fighting a guy that you're basically putting him back on the Dana White Contender Series, and the same thing for Jack Della Maddalena. That sucks because that really made it, in my opinion, a stacked card. Now that those guys are fighting people that we don't really know or probably aren't that great, it's like, it's a good card, but I think because we've been spoiled with shit sometimes, with just terrible cards, I think this is like, oh, we're so gracious for UFC 290 now. It's good, but it's not as good as it was. And then I agree on the fact that Volkanovski and Yair completely destroys John Jones and Stipe in regards to which one is the more exciting fight. I kind of understand what I'm going to get with Jones and Stipe, even if it's more competitive than I would maybe expect. Volkanovski and Yair, like as a Volk fan especially, this is a fight that has me nervous. This is a fight that makes me think like, holy shit, like Yair Rodriguez is a different kind of beast than anyone Volkanovski's ever fought. I genuinely do not know how Volkanovski is going to like maneuver with this guy on the feet. And then when it comes to the grappling, I think the reason why I'm picking Volk is because of the grappling, but and the co-main event, incredibly competitive. A lot of people that haven't really rewatched Pantoja's fights are going to be very surprised. I'm just going to say that. They're going to be surprised.
Yeah, dude. For me, and I've been talking about this all week. I don't know if you've seen it. I've been talking about it really for months. For me, what makes a fight so interesting, especially when you have a dominant champion, is the perceived level of threat. It doesn't matter if Volk goes out there and destroys him, and let's say it's not even competitive. But going into the fight, the anticipation, I genuinely believe Yair Rodriguez has a chance, where I didn't really feel the same about Max Holloway in the trilogy or the Korean Zombie. And that's what makes it so interesting. And then the co-main event, you have the fact that you have that backstory where Pantoja has the 2 wins over him. And I think a lot of people are taking that into account. But if you actually go back and watch their more recent fights, I think it's pretty clear that Moreno gets it done. I think you said you were picking the same.
I'm picking Moreno. When I rewatched Pantoja, when I rewatched some of his fights, hold on, I'm just making sure that the connection is okay. All right, the connection is fine.
You started lagging for a second, but then it came back.
Yeah. All right. So to main event again, like I'm picking Moreno, but I am worried because when I rewatch Pantoja's fights, I'm very surprised with how tough this man is, and especially like, again, he just charges into people's range and has no respect for the power of other flyweights. Now, don't get me wrong, he's had some fights where he hasn't just, again, bulldozed forward. Like he's had fights with Manel Kape, and even his first fight with Brandon Moreno, where he's just striking him at range. But you pair that with the fact that now he's kind of developed this system to where he has a perfect plan on how to dismantle someone. He just is very confident with his approach. And Brandon Moreno has gotten so much better. And I truly think that, if you're going to go with an underdog on this card, if you're into betting guys, then Pantoja's the guy, because he definitely could cause an upset. And the same thing can be said about Volk and Yair. Again, the perceived level of threat is really important in regards to, ranking how good a fight is. But let me ask you, when it comes to the main event, how do you think the striking is going to play out? Because some people have heard me say that Volk, he can't stand with Yair Rodriguez for 5 rounds. And they've gotten up in arms because Volkanovski, in a lot of people's opinions, is the best striker in the UFC. And I've even said that he's the best striker in the UFC. I know that you're, an Adesanya guy to some degree, but how do you think the striking is going to play out? And do you think that Volkanovski would be a fool not to grapple early? Or do you think, he's good enough with his preparation to where he can do whatever he wants, or maybe just stand on the feet early and then go to the grappling later on in the fight? Because I think that'd be a bad game plan.
I think that Yair Rodriguez, I do agree that Yair's striking is so good. The kicks are so fast. The kicks are so powerful. And that's why I love this fight, because you've never, think about all the fights that Volkanovski's had over the past few years, at least for title defenses. You've never been thinking, oh, this guy can finish him. You've just been thinking, oh, maybe this guy wins a decision. Maybe Max outpoints him. Yair can KO him. Now, I'm not saying that's super likely, but it's very, very possible. I think it's more likely than a lot of fans are giving him credit for. But I think Volk is going to mix in the grappling early. Volk isn't dumb. Volk's one of the smartest fighters on the roster, has a great fight IQ. And I think what's going to happen is you'll see Volk striking with him later in the fight. I think once Volk starts getting some takedowns, getting some control time, you'll see Yair land some elbows off the back and do some damage there. And I think Yair I think Volk will have some damage by the end of this fight. But I think as it gets later in the fight and Yair's a little bit more tired and he's worried about the takedown, I think you'll see Volk strike to prove a point. I don't know if you remember, but the third round, Khabib Conor, Khabib, everyone says Conor won the third round, but if you go back and watch that third round, Khabib's just clowning him. Habib's just standing in front of him, flat-footed, no head movement, literally open hand smacking him because he was proving a point. And
I just want to cut you off just for a second, because I want to mention that moment. If you're looking at, the stats and you're going to score it as a judge, of course, maybe Conor won that round. But I've always said that Khabib was big brothering him in that round. He was taking it easy on him. He was basically playing with his food. And people, again, I feel like they give Conor too much credit for his takedown defense. And we'll talk about Conor later. But one of the reasons why I think people glaze Conor's takedown defense is because of the third round. Oh, he hit a couple of takedowns and kept it standing. But bro, Khabib was not, and I'm just going to say it, he wasn't really trying to take Conor down that much in that round. He was basically at the point to where there was not a lot of sting at the end of Conor's shots. And he was, he felt safe enough to be able to stand and just, again, prove a point. So Volkanovski is a guy, the competitor that he is, when he starts yelling in the face of Max Holloway, when he starts landing some good shots, he is the kind of guy that will prove a point, but later on in the fight.
Later on, when the power isn't there as much. And with all that being said, I think Yair can win this fight. And, with the amount of 5th round finishes we've seen of champions losing their belt in the 5th round over the past, seems like a year, with Glover and, Leon winning the belt over Usman. Who knows? I mean, if anyone's going to get a 5th round KO over Volk, it'd probably be Yair Rodriguez. Not that I'm saying that's going to happen, but imagine Volk is winning the fight. He starts to try to prove a point on the feet, which I think he will, and I think he will be able to land on the feet. And I think Yair is going to leave with a lot of damage after this fight. But imagine Yair just finds a bicycle kick or a spinning back elbow or that upward elbow like Korean Zombie. He landed on a Korean Zombie. Imagine how insane that would be for the MMA community.
Yeah. That would have me completely just black pilled for like a whole week. I'd be out of it, man. I mean, I'm a big Volkanovski fan, but again, that would be a legendary moment. It would be, if anything, a little bit more impressive than the Usman KO, even though, to be honest, Usman had the aura of invincibility as well, just like Volkanovski. Like I didn't really see him getting put out. He was that juggernaut that would walk people down, and knocking him out wasn't really on anyone's mind. So it would shock me. I think if Yair were to catch Volk again, it'd probably be with that spinning back fist or the spinning back elbow, something like that. But
What was your
I want to talk about. Yeah.
What was your pick for the main event? Was it Volk by decision? Seems like most people are picking that pick.
Yeah, I'm choosing Volk by decision. I know Yair has been stopped by Edgar, and that was a doctor stoppage because of his eyes swelling up. And there's always a possibility with that, especially with Volkanovski's, what he did to Brian Ortega. I could totally see him just beating him to a pulp, beating him into the canvas, and maybe at the end of the fourth round, Yair just lifelessly laying on the ground and his corner, thinking about throwing in the towel. That's the only way I see this fight being finished. If it's in between rounds, I don't think that Volkanovski is going to knock him out. Here, along with a lot of the other featherweights, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the featherweight division has so many guys that are talked about as having granite chins. Maybe it's just that featherweights don't actually hit that hard and we're overrating a lot of their chins. What do you think about that? Do you think people overrate featherweight chins, or do you genuinely think that everyone in the featherweight division is off his nails?
I feel like there's not a lot of people in the featherweight division with crazy power. I mean, it's Josh Emmett. I mean, Topuria has good power, but it's not like he has unbelievable power. There's not really one of those guys that just has crazy knockout power. And then you have a lot of guys at the top that have good volume. So you got Volk and you got Max who throw a lot of good volume. Topuria even throws a lot of good volume. So I think it's just kind of a little bit overrated on the chins, and it's more of the power. There's not a lot of guys with that crazy power in the division. Because imagine someone like Volk had Josh Emmett's power. Max Holloway would have been slept by now, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I do think so. I mean, with the amount of damage that Volkanovski has landed throughout their fights, but you never know. Max is just a fucking, I don't understand. I mean, Max is a little bit, he's got to be studied with his kind of chin. But I want to get to the grappling because we both know that Yair Rodriguez, especially when it comes to his guard, he's a beast. I mean, he's a different beast. He's got the ability to hurt you with strikes from bottom, to throw these amazing up kicks. Like in the first round against Max Holloway, the commentary, all the commentators started freaking out the second Yair hit the ground because he threw this like leaping up kick, and it was amazing. It was fast. He can hurt you with a lot down there. But what I've found from watching tape on Yair is that when you pass that guard, I don't think he's all that. Well, what's your take on this, man?
Yeah, I think he's got a good guard, and that's kind of pretty much it. But I don't think he's that great at getting up off the bottom either. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of it, so it's hard to know. But he got taken down by Brian Ortega. I think people don't give him the credit for that Brian Ortega fight. I think, honestly, you could give him the submission win right there. He was setting up an armbar, Ortega pulled out. But again, from the guard, I think Yair's really good. I mean, I don't think he's one of these guys that, is like, I'm trying to think, like a Rusamal Palahares from years ago getting leg locks, or like a Damian Maia where you absolutely don't want to follow him to the ground. But I think in the guard, he can find those sub attempts, whether it be a triangle choke or an armbar, because he throws them up so fast. And then also he blinds you with like shots from the bottom, whether it be up kicks or elbows or hammer fists from the bottom, which is crazy. And you don't see a lot of guys do that. I've said this before, and I think you were even in one of my chats one time when we were talking about it. Yair's one of the most ferocious guys in the UFC, if not the most ferocious guy. He fights every fight like his life depends on it. And that's, for me, what makes this fight so compelling, because even if he's on his back in the third round and he's tired, he's going to be throwing elbows, throwing hammer fists, trying to cut up Volk. And then the second Volk is worried about the damage, all of a sudden he's going to be throwing up a triangle. But I think ultimately Volk's submission defense, he showed it against Brian Ortega, was in a deep guillotine, was in a deep triangle, I think, at one point. I just think Volk is smart enough where he'll be able to avoid it. But you never know. Who knows? Maybe he wades into Yair's guard and he gets up kicked on the way down, and the next thing you know, he's in a triangle choke. I think if Yair does get a submission, I don't think Volk taps. I think Volk just goes out cold. I don't think he's the type of guy that's going to tap. But after you pass the guard, and I want to talk about the co-main event too in terms of the grappling. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But after you pass his guard, it's not the same, even though we haven't seen a lot over the past few years because he's kind of been inactive.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on Volk not tapping. He's going to go to sleep, and that in and of itself would just be a spectacle. But yeah, I've seen Max Holloway take Yair down, pass the guard, get his back and just kind of beat on him a little bit. And there was a weird moment in the second round in the Yair and Max fight where they hit the ground, and like within a couple of seconds, it almost looked like Yair started shelling up and he turned his back to Max Holloway. I don't know if you caught that. That was very weird. I don't know if he got injured there, because if he did get injured there, then that would explain him maybe kind of not looking so great later on in that fight. There was a very weird moment there. If any of you guys want to watch that back, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, I ultimately think that if this fight goes to the ground, I think Volk's preparation with the B team and, fighting Islam. And if you look at his early fights as well, again, guys, if you look up Volkanovski versus Elkins or not Elkins, but Volkanovski versus Shane Young and the early opponents that he had in the UFC, he was taking these guys down and beating them up. And he has a little bit of a wrestling background. And Joey, I used to shit on, Volkanovski's fans saying he's got that rugby grit, that rugby toughness going into the Islam fight. But I genuinely think that sport, the rugby sport, especially the fact that Volkanovski's like a shorter guy, is a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I'm a short guy too, so I can understand it. I think that rugby background actually just makes him a better grappler. I mean, at least going from wrestling, he wrestled when he was a little kid, to rugby, then into MMA, where right off the bat, he's a grappler. And now he's coming into his own with his striking. Now he's fighting Islam. I think he's going to be a little bit too much for Yair. And I think that Yair against Josh Emmett, I mean, he had softened him up so much and just kind of broke him and battered him. By the time that fight got to the ground, I think Josh Emmett was already, a dead man walking, basically. And I don't think that Volkanovski is going to get broken early on. And the reason why I think Volk's going to win is because he's going to get this fight to the ground early on. And yeah, but if I feel like we've covered the main, unless there's anything else you want to mention about it. Like, do you want to just go into the co-main?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is I was kind of flipping back and forth. When I saw that third and fourth round against Max Holloway, and I see Max Holloway, I think it was in the fourth round, mounting him. I'm like, yeah, there's no way. Yeah. So don't be surprised if Volk ends up in mount at some point in this fight.
Yeah, man, that would be a nightmare for Yair Rodriguez. That would be a nightmare. And he could get the finish, Volkanovski. I'd love to see him get a finish. And if he does, imagine the narrative of Volkanovski after beating a Yair Rodriguez, just looking completely unstoppable, 34 years old. And I know that I just mentioned the co-main event, but I do have to ask you, how much longer, if he does get this win on Saturday, how much longer are you going to be confident when maybe picking an Alexander Volkanovski to win a fight? Because I've been talking about this recently. I feel like Volkanovski is the kind of guy, given how competitive he is, to, even if he does fall off a little bit, just stick around way too long and go on like a massive loss streak. I don't know if Volk's got the early retirement set up and ready to go. What do you think?
Dude, I always talk about it. It's the laws of percentages. Every dominant champion is going to have a downfall at some point. But right now, it's just hard for me to imagine like somebody beating him. I mean, the next most likely person to beat him would be Topuria, but I don't think Topuria is going to beat him. If Yair can't beat him, I don't think Topuria beats him. I just don't. Yeah. But maybe he could, but I'm highly doubtful of that. But there's going to be someone making their way up that's eventually going to get him. But I don't know when it would be. He's 34 years old right now?
Yeah.
Time is going to catch up with him eventually, and you're not going to see it. And who knows? You never know. Like, think about the overall thought process of a lot of the MMA community in terms of Volkanovski right now. That could all change like that on Saturday. He gets chinned on Saturday. Volk will never be the same. He's 35 years old. He was overrated. You know what I'm saying? It can change like that. I don't think it'll be this fight, but getting to 36, 35, 36, 37 in the featherweight division, usually, if you've been watching for long enough, it usually always catches up to him. So it'll eventually happen. I'd probably pick him over Topuria. But I do think you're right. Volk is kind of like hard-headed. I don't think he'll ever be. And that's crazy to even think of. I mean, imagine Volk's on like a 3 KO losing streak. He pulls the Tony Ferguson business where he's just losing over and over again. But yeah, hopefully not anytime soon. But I think it will eventually happen like it happens to all dominant champs.
Yeah. And, there's also a chance that this fight, and I feel like in my mind right now, it's either Yair is going to finish Volkanovski or Volkanovski is going to have trouble early on and then just dominate Yair. But there's a chance that Volkanovski could scrape by 48-47, just barely getting it done. And then all of a sudden the narrative is Volkanovski falling off? Are these, new featherweights going to be able to close the distance? And maybe we're starting to see the new era guys take over. I don't know. I haven't really been thinking about that all that much, but that's also another possibility. And I don't know, maybe if that even does happen and Volk still edges it out, maybe it's just the case that Yair's just, again, built different than some of these other featherweights. But yeah, He's almost 35. Again, not many champions in the lighter weight classes past the age of 35. I don't think there's ever been one. But let's get to the co-main event. Brandon Moreno and Alexandre Pantoja. You're picking Brandon Moreno as well. You're picking him by what? 4th round TKO?
Yeah, yep, I am.
Okay. And just like kind of let us know why, because I'm picking Moreno, but Pantoja's so got. And to be fair, the last time Moreno kind of lit up on the feet a little bit and just had his way with, made him look pretty easy. And of course, we're only looking at 2 opponents. We're looking at Kai Kara-France and we're looking at Davidson Figueiredo. To be fair, you could say Davidson Figueiredo is starting to fall off a little bit, but he did struggle with Kai Kara-France. I don't know if you watched that fight back recently, but you have. Why do you think that Moreno is going to finish him? Because again, I just don't know if that's going to happen, but what's your take on the matter?
So I'm going Brandon Moreno, 4th round TKO. I know people are going to bring up, oh, Pantoja has 2 wins over and 1 being a finish. That was in 2016 and 2018. That's 5 and 7 years ago. Literally could not matter less. It does not matter at all whatsoever, other than maybe mindset going into the fight. Then also you look at Pantoja, and I think he has, I'm going off the top of my head, so I might be a little bit wrong, but I think he has 10 submission wins, right? Everyone thinks of him as a jiu-jitsu guy, submission guy. He has 10 submission wins. 8 of them are by rear naked choke. One's technically labeled as face crank, but you get the point. From the back position, hooks in. And I just think Pantoja, his whole style is just to rush forward, kind of create chaos, and then end up on your back. That's literally what he's doing. A lot of people talk about his aggressive style and the way he marches guys down, but it's just in hopes of creating a mistake, and then next thing you know, he ends up on your back. And he's crazy. He has crazy good scrambles. I think I was watching the Askar Askarov fight. At one point, he was on his hands and knees on the ground facing the fence. And Askar Askarov was kind of like back mount, but not with his hooks in or anything. Within like 7 seconds, Pantoja ended up on his back. So he is great at scrambling, and he can create a scramble. But if he doesn't get Brandon Moreno's back, I don't see him beating Brandon Moreno. And then the fights that I watched, he gets tired in the 3rd round, and they aren't nowhere near the level of output that like Brandon Moreno versus Davidson Figueiredo have been. So what I see is it being kind of competitive early. Pantoja is going to kind of look to use that same style he's been using and he's having success with, marching you down, looking to create moments where he can end up on your back, create a scramble. And I just think I'm pretty confident that Moreno gets a finish. I'd be shocked if Pantoja doesn't get a win early, which I don't think he will. If it goes the 5 round, I would be absolutely shocked if Pantoja got a decision win, because from what I've seen, I don't trust his cardio. And I know Kai Kara-France looked good in their fight, but Moreno was winning, and then the 3rd round, Kai Kara-France started to come on strong, and then Moreno finished him. So it was like, you can look at that 2 minutes, and it started to go in his direction, but then he got finished. So it's like I take that all into account, and I'm like, I got to go Brandon Moreno by TKO. I think Pantoja will slow down. Go ahead.
And also there's just this, I think there's a little bit of a difference in striking ability between a guy like Pantoja and Kai Kara-France. That's Kai Kara-France's entire game. And we didn't really see a lot of grappling from Brandon Moreno. I feel like, I understand that Kai Kara-France does have good takedown defense. I mean, we saw his ability to defend off submissions against Askar Askarov. That was a guy that was basically just trying to put it on him with the grappling, and he shut that down, even had his back taken at a couple moments, but stayed calm, worked through the adversity. So the guy is a decent, at least defensive grappler. I feel like Moreno could have done better than Askar Askarov if he really went for it. And to be honest, Askar Askarov, I'm not really that high on him or whatever, but nonetheless, Moreno, he struggled finding the mark a little bit. I get it. He was winning that fight. But I don't see Pantoja getting this done by decision. I was watching the fight back with Roy Val, and sure, he got the back in the 2nd round, and that's where he's going to be most comfortable. And in your most comfortable position, you're probably not going to, succumb to being tired as much as you would be if you're just out of your element. But on the feet, he really did start to slow down in that fight. And then you're looking at how many 5-rounders has this guy fought? I don't think he's fought in a single 5-rounder in the UFC.
I don't think he has.
Exactly. And all Moreno has done left and right is fighting Figgy, fighting a guy like, and none of these fights are going 5 rounds, of course, because he's getting a couple finishes. But I think the experience, especially, people were mentioning, is Moreno still super, super hungry? He's been on top. He's been the first Mexican UFC champion, and he's got he's got a lot of clout, of course. But because he's gotten all of these wins over Figueiredo, and he's fought the man 4 fucking times. I'm pretty sure he can get up for a guy that's beat him twice that he hasn't fought since what, 2018.
Yeah.
I think the level of motivation for him will be fine. And I'm sure the man's nervous. Like, of course, he's lost this guy. There's got to be something in his mind that's trying to mess with him. But I just think he's a different guy, man. 24 when he lost to Pantoja. And like, you look at his striking on the feet, like it wasn't anything compared to how it is now.
Yeah, it's not even the same fighter at that point in time.
No.
And also, I think Moreno has the wrestling advantage. And I already see a scenario, and I think I even mentioned this in my video, I can't remember, but I see a scenario where Moreno just out wrestles him and takes him down, not for the whole fight, but he mixes in some takedowns. Like he shot some takedowns on Kai Kara France, wasn't really looking to complete them. I don't think he even got any, but kind of created some moments. I see him maybe taking down Pantoja, and you hear Joe Rogan screaming, oh, he's entering into his world. But unless Pantoja gets on your back, he's not a guy that's throwing up triangles. He's not a guy that's looking for Kimuras or arm bars. He's primarily looking for the rear naked choke. So I think as Pantoja slows down from being, stuffed from the takedown attempts, and then I think Moreno mixes in the grappling a little bit himself, not too crazy and get too carried away and end up in a scramble where he does give up his back. I could see Moreno beating him up in the wrestling in like the third and fourth round, and eventually he's going to find a finish in the fourth round, I think.
Yeah. Man, I'd love to see Moreno offensively grapple, because I know that, of course, when he's on the back foot and Pantoja rushing at him and he's trying to get the back, he's going to have to scramble. He's going to have to get out of there. But if he puts Pantoja on the back foot with the grappling and he actually tries to take him down, I really do trust his ability to out-grapple him, or at least to maintain top position, just to slow him down, take the wind out of his sails. I can't wait for this fight, man. And to be honest, I haven't really been that hyped for a Brandon Moreno fight in quite some time, just because, again, how hyped are you going to be when you're seeing Moreno and Figueiredo 40? You know what I mean? It's just like, it's too much at some point.
I love seeing those matchups, but I get what you're saying. It is finally some fresh meat for Brandon Moreno.
Yeah, no, I like Figueiredo and I like Brandon Moreno. I love their fight styles, but this is just, it's like the Pereira and Adesanya level of interest, because they fought back in the day. And of course, they fought in MMA, which even makes it, if anything, a little more interesting.
It's the MMA version of Adesanya Pereira in a way.
Pretty much. And I'm really looking forward to it. I know you mentioned that you don't really like press conferences that much, but you think that Pantoja's giving me the vibes of a Figueiredo, the guy that's going to talk a little bit of shit. So I'm looking forward to the press conference. Before we get on to some of the other fights on this card, just back to the press conferences. You mentioned Kevin Lee, and you also mentioned Michael Chiesa. I just have to say that's one of my favorite moments in the press conference. I kind of understand what your take is on seeing these grown men yell at each other while we're going to watch them fight. Get it, but do you have some favorite moments from press conferences? Do you have any kind of nostalgia for press conferences back in the day that you felt were, better or just more interesting overall? Like, what is an ideal press conference for you?
The best press conference I think I've ever seen is when Nate Diaz stepped in on short notice to fight Conor McGregor at UFC 196, and they did like an impromptu press conference in a gym. And there was some back and forth, but it's not like, see, my problem is okay, some back and forth is kind of interesting, especially when you're like 15 and 16. But also, I feel like a lot of the back and forth nowadays is just manufactured. It's just like, oh, I'm going to go there and I'm going to try to get him I'm going to try to get a gotcha moment at the press conference, and I'm going to try to get a soundbite on UFC's Twitter or Instagram. And for me, it would be way more compelling if I felt like it was real. And that McGregor versus Diaz presser in the gym, I don't know if you saw it. I don't know how long you've been watching. I'm assuming you've been watching since then, but maybe I'm wrong. It was a crazy press conference. That was one of my favorite press conferences. And I'm trying to think of another one.
Because that was authentic for sure. Yeah,
it was authentic. So you know what I mean? If I get so tired, and I feel like it's almost an insulting our intelligence when they're like, yeah, there's some real bad blood here. And these guys don't actually hate each other. Like if I knew they genuinely hate each other and they're talking shit to each other, okay, I can enjoy that. I can enjoy that even as a grown man, and I'm not being a 16-year-old. But outside of that, them just throwing subtle jabs at each other, and Conor McGregor being coked up or drunk at a press conference, and I'm mixing in stuff, but shoving Michael Chandler, like people are like, oh my God, he mushed Michael Chandler. Like that doesn't really entertain me that much. And half the time, and I know you said you're going to watch the presser, and I'll probably watch the presser too, but it's like, is it most likely you're going to end and you're going to say, oh, that press conference was trash. I mean, how many times have we done that?
Yeah,
I've done it a million times. Like, oh, I hope this press conference is interesting. And then afterwards, I'm like, damn, that was shit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that is, I think that's a good point. Like the last press conference absolutely sucked and I was very disappointed. I did like the Strickland and Adesanya press conference. I know you're not a big fan of Sean Strickland, but I do think that, that was at least some kind of a sign of authenticity, at least from, the vibe that I got. Adesanya doesn't like Sean Strickland, and he got a little bit annoyed from Sean Strickland. But either way, let's get on into the rest of the card. I think Dricus du Plessis and Robert Whittaker, it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I feel like everyone's been talking about Robert Whittaker winning this fight. I don't even know if you want to discuss that. Do you want to just go pat?
We can discuss it for like 1 minute, but what's the point?
Sure.
I mean, Dricus and the people act like I hate Dricus. It's like when you're honest about your opinion, for some reason you hate a certain fighter. There's very few fighters that I actually hate. I don't like Tony Kelly. I don't like Juliana Pena. Dricus du Plessis is not one of those guys, but he's one of the biggest frauds in the top 10 of any division. He got the best possible path to the top, and just Robert Whittaker's fought better competition and looked better against that better competition. I don't see a situation where Robert Whittaker doesn't finish him, but that's pretty much my take on the fight.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I feel like when I'm thinking about a fraud, I'm thinking about someone that gets a ton of hype. I just don't see the hype for Dricus du Plessis. Like, no one really gives him a chance here, and people just talk about him just being shit overall, to be honest. So
that is true.
His grappling, though, is pretty decent. I do respect that. I do like his grappling, but in this matchup against Robert Whittaker, I don't necessarily think that's going to be something that is going to give him a path to victory. But yeah.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't even think his grappling's that good. I don't know if you remember the Brad Tavares fight. He's trying to do like a lateral drop, ends up on bottom.
Yeah, he got taken down.
Getting bodied by Derek Brunson, even in the second round, had some moments against Darren Till, who has the worst grappling ever. So I just don't see any bright spots, but dude does have some serious heart, and there's no quit in him. So if there's anyone that somehow pulls off a victory in some way, sure, just willpower, Dricus du Plessis is the guy, but I don't see it.
Yeah. Any other notable picks for UFC 290? Because there are a lot of favorites, and that's something that I also have to mention about the card, and I can't wait for it nonetheless, and I'm really excited for a lot of these fights. Jalen Turner, Dan Hooker, I'm very confident that Jalen Turner is going to go in there and smoke him. I'm confident about the Bo Nickel fight and the Jack Della Maddalena fight, but either way, that's something that this card is missing outside of the top two fights, and even on the early prelims with a lot of these prospects now taking on guys that aren't so great. I feel like, Vitor Petrino and Paracchio is a competitive fight. I mean, like, there aren't really many. We're really grasping at straws when we're trying to find super competitive fights on UFC 290. There's a couple of others as well. I'm not too familiar with these guys. They're coming off of the Dana White Contenders Series, but do you also feel like maybe this card is going to just be a little bit anticlimactic, or do you have any other underdogs that you're taking?
Yeah, dude, honestly, now that you say it, I meant to say this in the beginning when you asked me about how do I grade the card. It is kind of unfortunate because you look at a lot of these matchups and like you're just like, okay, I'm pretty confident Alexander Volkanovski, but I do love the fight. But outside of the top two fights, you're like, Robert Whittaker's going to win, Jalen Turner's going to win, Bo Nickel's most likely going to win. And then you're like, okay, Jack Della Maddalena is going to win. The one fight I will say, and I know women's MMA gets shit on quite a bit, but when I was watching tape, I watched tape for all these fights. Yasmin, I think it's pronounced Howergy, versus Denise Gomes actually is an underrated fight. When I've rewatched some of their tape, they actually go out there and brawl. And I think when I saw that Yasmin's a massive favorite or something, let me double check that real quick. Yeah, she's 420 on Tapology. I think that could go either way, and I think that will be a fun fight, and I think that is a fight that belongs on the prelim. But outside of that, I mean, Jimmy Crute and Alonzo Menefield, I think they both got horrible CTE. I'm not really looking forward to seeing that matchup all that much, but it should be exciting.
That actually is going to be exciting and competitive. I completely forgot about that, but even though I'm picking Alonzo Menefield, I know that if Jimmy Crute goes out there and just sticks to him like glue and tries to grapple with him, and I know that's what he did last time, to be fair. He did take some big risks on the ground, of course, but I don't know, man. When I think about the Jimmy Crute striking, I just I see a guy that's just asking to be KO'd, and he doesn't have a very promising style on the feet, especially against a guy as powerful as Alonzo Menefield. Alonzo Menefield, sure, he's old. He's not that crisp at all. But I mean, I don't know, man. I don't take a lot of confidence in Jimmy Crute going against a big
And I
puncher like
picked
this,
Jimmy Crute.
especially after the last fight. I picked Jimmy Crute to win the last one as well. I thought he was going to steamroll him, and it looked like it in the beginning, but yeah.
But outside of that, I think there's a lot of like single fighter performances I'm looking forward to, like Tesoro Tyra, Cameron Simon, stuff like that, Jack Della Maddalena. It's like I don't love the matchups, but I'm looking forward to seeing their performances. But it's like they're not really worth going through because everyone's picking the same person for the most part. Yeah, I was hoping we were going to disagree on the main or co-main.
Yeah, man. I heard you maybe leaning towards Yair Rodriguez. I know I've been worried leading up to this fight as a Volkanovski fan, but it's just when you really watch the tape back, it's just so hard to pick him when he's getting out grappled by Max Holloway, who we know he's all right, but come on, he's not Volkanovski on the ground. It's just
I think Volkanovski even took Holloway down once or twice, if I'm not mistaken.
There you go. But let's get into some other topics, and I just want to kind of transition into Izzy and Khamzat. Now, I know you want to talk about Charles and Islam, and we'll definitely get to that. The reason I want to bring up Izzy and Khamzat is because I'm just thinking about Robert Whittaker and grapplers, because we mentioned that Dricus du Plessis, of course, he likes to grapple, but he's just not really on that level to where you can actually have a good chance against Whittaker. How do you see Khamzat Chimaev matching up with Izzy and Whittaker? Because right off the bat, I know it seems like at least for most people, it would seem like the logical pick to choose Robert Whittaker to beat him. Whittaker is amazing takedown defense. He showed it. And Khamzat Chimaev with that style to where he's just coming out of the gates, guns blazing. How am I going to be confident in that guy lasting in the later rounds when he has that kind of style? And I'm thinking that he's going to fight in a 5-rounder. So in a 3-rounder, we're talking about something different. But against Whittaker, whoever he's fighting next, they might even make it a 5-round feature fight. I don't know. Whittaker tough for him, but I could still see Khamzat Chimaev just sinking in some hooks and being a little bit craftier than the other middleweights that have tried to take him down, like Yoel Romero, fantastic wrestler. We all know the guy's got a background in the Olympics and all that and Pan American Games and whatnot, but Romero is not the same kind of grappler. And then, Robert Whittaker, it's like he's fighting Derek Brunson, he's fighting Dricus du Plessis and Marvin Vettori. How do you think that fight would go down? Because I would pick Whittaker. I would pick him, but I'd give Khamzat a chance early on in that fight.
Dude, both those fights are so tough for Khamzat Chimaev, which makes me just pissed he's not staying in the welterweight division. And I don't even know what's going on with him, to be honest. It's annoying as hell. But against Whittaker, I would give him more of a chance against Whittaker than I would against Israel Adesanya. I think Adesanya would come out with heavy footwork. I do think if Khamzat could get him down, maybe his jiu-jitsu and his submission game is a little bit better. I just think that style, that like brute force style, similar to Pantoja, where Khamzat just comes out and charges forward and throws combinations and looks for the clinch and looks for takedowns and nonstop being relentless. I don't think that works out in a 5-round championship fight against a guy who's elite. Obviously, if he's champion, he's an elite level fighter. I just think Adesanya, you would see, this is going to be a horrible comparison, but you would see a modified version of Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm. I think Khamzat would come out, charge forward. I think you see Adesanya moving side to side very well, making Khamzat miss, maybe some clinch work, but not getting him down. And I think Adesanya would just work him over on the feet. And as the fight got longer, I think Adesanya would start pulling away. And maybe even Adesanya finding a KO because Khamzat gets so careless. I mean, if Gilbert Burns is catching your chin, what is Adesanya going to do? You know what I mean? The striking, there's such, the level of striking is so much better for Adesanya than it's somebody like Gilbert Burns. And I don't think Adesanya is going to come in and be terrified of the takedown. And on top of that, Khamzat's not going to have that size advantage, I don't think. He's a big guy. He had a size advantage at welterweight. He's not going to be the same at middleweight. So I would take Adesanya. I mean, who knows? If that fight doesn't happen for a couple of years, maybe my opinion shifts and changes. But against Robert Whittaker, I think it'd be a close fight. I'd probably go Robert Whittaker as well. I just think Whittaker's just so well-rounded and so good. Defensive grappling sound, offensive grappling sound, striking is sound, stamina is sound. And I just can't – can you trust Khamzat in a 5-round fight? I certainly can't.
No, I don't trust him and his ability to get a decision win. Again, like people have been talking about even Jared Cannonier, Khamzat Chimaev, and yes, I would pick Khamzat in that fight, to anyone that is going to hear this take. But at the same time, I worry that if he doesn't get these early finishes, that he could be susceptible to getting finished in the later rounds. We saw him in Gilbert Burns, and I'm just going to say this, as someone that picked Khamzat Chimaev to just steamroll Gilbert Burns, which wasn't an excellent pick, and also for someone that was sitting here and saying, Khamzat did enough. Guys, stop complaining. He won the fight. I've rewatched that fight back a few times. There's an argument for Gilbert Burns winning the last round. There is an argument. It was very close. And I'm just going to say this. It could have gone either way. All right. Gilbert Burns had a 3-minute moment where he's landing good, flush, hard shots on the chin of Khamzat Chimaev. And I know Khamzat had a good flurry early on, but what I'm trying to get at is I don't think that Gilbert Burns, he's very good. Of course, we're talking about another welterweight guy. I feel like another seasoned striker with a really good gas tank. We've seen Gilbert Burns kind of slow down too, would be able to give him issues later on. But when I break down these fights between guys that are moving up a weight class, I always kind of look at recent history, and I'm looking at guys that have moved up and had a lot of success. And I think that there might be a bit of a skill difference between each weight class. So for example, like think about Charles, Dustin, Conor McGregor, even though he only had one fight, so that's not a good example, but a lot of featherweights have moved up and they've cleaned up shop. A lot of lightweights have moved down and they've gotten cleaned out. Guys that have moved up from lightweight to welterweight have done well. Gilbert Burns, sure, he was young and he was still green when he got KO'd by Dan Hooker, but I don't know if he would ever have gotten so far in the lightweight division, but he moves up to welterweight, and the guy is basically someone that's just a solid staple in the top 5. And do you also see the same kind of skill gap between divisions? Because I think that definitely plays a part in why I would trust a pick in Khamzat for a lot of these fights.
I feel like typically just overall, and I would love to actually go back and try to make a list of this. I feel like fighters typically when they move up, they do better than when they move down. I feel like when fighters move down, they're more susceptible to getting finished. They just do worse in general. I think of Dan Hooker going down and fighting Arnold Allen, got smashed. So maybe the weight cut was restricting Khamzat's skill set. I feel like there is probably a case to be made. I want to see that fight. Honestly, with there being no clear-cut number 1 contender at middleweight right now, I wouldn't have a problem with Khamzat getting the title shot because there's no real clear-cut contender right now. I mean, okay, what are you going to say? Strickland, 2-fight winning streak? Okay, fair enough. But, against – and I get it. He did get good wins. But, Strickland, Cannonier, we've already seen it. Whitaker, we've already seen it. If he beats Dreykus –
yeah.
I mean, if Dreykus wins, I guess he is the clear-cut number 1 contender. Obviously, if he beats Robert Whitaker, wouldn't want Khamzat to get it over him. But I wouldn't mind Khamzat getting the shot. And I think he would have a chance. I just think that Izzy would be too good for him. I think Izzy would be too good for him. But as far as the skill gap moving up, I do believe that it seems like it. If you move up, you're more likely to have more success than if you move down a weight class. So that it's going to be interesting, but the dude's never fighting. I mean, what's going on here? It's been so annoying. Took no damage in September of last year. Yeah. He got popular off of being active, and now he's never fighting. It's infuriating, actually.
Yeah, it is. Every time, I bring this guy up, I just am constantly, I have that in the back of my head. Fuck, this guy used to be so special because he was just someone that would just run into the cage no matter what. And all that being said, I just can't see, for example, Israel Adesanya, for sure he's coming off of an amazing win over Alex Pereira, and we haven't really seen a lot of grappling from him since the Robert Whitaker fight. Of course, we saw it against Pereira in their first fight in the UFC, but I'm not really putting too much stake into that. I don't think Israel Adesanya is taking down Khamzat Chimaev, but Khamzat is so fucking tenacious with the way that he just runs across the octagon. I have a feeling he just gets his hands on Izzy. And I don't know if Izzy's fought anyone comparable to that. I don't know if he's ever felt that before. And of course, Khamzat Chimaev's never fought anyone like Adesanya. And he hasn't fought a lot of guys. I mean, we're talking about what? Kevin Holland and Li Jing Liang. We haven't really seen this guy fuck with someone at the level of Adesanya. Striking, we haven't seen that as well. We've seen it against Gilbert Burns, completely different level. But the way that I see it is Adesanya is going to be fighting for his life in the early rounds. I don't know if he's necessarily got the ability to evade that clinch or that initial collision. So what do you think? Why do you trust him to evade that, or maybe not even evade it, but just stay safe on the ground?
I just feel like, if Whitaker's not doing it to him, I know Whitaker ended up in a back position at one point in time, Marvin Vettori, but he got out of him so quick. He defended takedowns well. These were isolated incidents. And I feel like so many people, maybe you're one that's included in this, they just have this massive hate boner for Israel Adesanya. They want to see him lose so bad.
I
And they're
do
just
not like him.
wishful
I want to
thinking.
see him
It's
lose,
just
for
wishful
sure.
thinking. It's like, maybe if I see, let me rephrase this, because if Hamzat, let's say they book Hamzat versus Jared Cannonier or Hamzat versus Whitaker, and he goes out there and ragdolls him and takes him down, beats him up, I'll revisit this and I'll say, you know what? Maybe Hamzat has a chance, because if he's dominating these guys in the grappling, there's a chance that he could dominate Adesanya in the grappling. But from what I've seen so far, against Gilbert Burns and, Li Jingliang, that's not even in the same universe as a guy like Israel Adesanya. I know Gilbert Burns is good. He's in the welterweight division. He's not even a massive welterweight. Adesanya is a true middleweight guy. He's not going to have a size advantage over Adesanya. And Adesanya, if it's in a big cage, which it's going to be because it's going to be a pay-per-view somewhere live, the footwork is going to be too much. I just think Hamzat maybe has a good first round. Maybe he fights for 4 minutes in the first round, finally gets a takedown, and then the rest of the fight's going to go Adesanya's way, in my opinion. But I'd love to see it. I'm not campaigning against it by any means, because with an unknown like that, like Hamzat, who I feel like, I don't want to call him an unknown, but you get what I'm saying, an unknown at least at middleweight, there's always that chance. Maybe he's better than people are giving him credit for, even though I feel like a lot of people are kind of overhyping him a bit. Maybe there is a chance. Could you imagine if that even happened? I mean, my head would explode. That'd be crazy. That'd be just crazy to witness. Imagine he just goes out there and treats Adesanya like Khabib did Michael Johnson. My jaw would drop. I'm sure yours would too, even if you picked him.
I mean, even if I picked him, just to see it actually happen would be crazy. I don't even know if he does him like, I don't know if Hamzat does him like Khabib did Michael Johnson. He just kind of beats him up on the ground. The way that I would pick Hamzat, if he were to win, would just out-grapple Adesanya early, overwhelm him, land shots on Adesanya to distract him from defending off his submission, then catching him with something and sub in the first round. And that would be my pick. I do think he would do that. But again, there are many unknowns outside of the Gilbert Burns fight. And of course, Gilbert Burns is an elite level grappler, and Hamzat took him down and couldn't have any success there. I mean, we're looking at a win over Kevin Holland, and we're looking at a win over Li Jingliang. And I understand that Li Jingliang was ranked at one point, but like, he's just not a guy that's going to make me believe that Hamzat can do this to all the top guys. And I understand to some people it might sound crazy to say, well, if he doesn't do it to all the top guys, why do you think he's going to do it to Izzy? Ultimately, for me, it comes down to the fact that I genuinely don't think the middleweight division is very good. I do think that Adesanya is just going to be able to clean up shop with a lot of his future opponents. But I want to see that fight. I don't think we're going to get it anytime soon, because if you're looking at the trajectory of Hamzat Chimaev's career, we're looking at him. We don't even know who he's fighting. And we're probably going to get an announcement this month. I think the last time that they made an announcement for Abu Dhabi last year, it was in July after International Fight Week. A few weeks later, or maybe it was early August, but either way,
I don't remember.
If he's fighting Usman, or if he's fighting someone else, even like a Jared Cannonier, I don't think he's going to fight Adesanya anytime soon. And it's just one of those fights that I think it's going to just slip through the grasp of our hands. And I think that we're most likely going to see a Chimaev fight at welterweight. Maybe I could even see that, but I don't know. I don't think the UFC is going to necessarily give us what we want.
Let me ask you this. If you're making the fights at middleweight, what fight are you making right now?
Right now, I guess just because I'm going to hold off until UFC 290 to see what happens with Dricus if I'm the UFC. Because if Dricus wins, that's the fight I'm going to make, with Adesanya just calling for it and asking for it. I do like the idea of Strickland fighting Adesanya, just because I think that he's at that point in his career where he's at the peak of popularity. And, if he keeps fighting and he has a couple more fights, like, we could see this guy lose eventually. You know what I mean? And that fight is just, after a loss, is not going to happen. But the only guy I wouldn't mind jumping in front of Sean Strickland would be Hamzat Chimaev. Now, of course, if Whitaker goes out there and beats Dricus du Plessis, then that's the fight that I'm going to make next. Then I'm going to make Strickland and Adesanya if Adesanya gets past Whitaker, because I really do want to see the build up to Strickland and Adesanya. And Adesanya's asked for it too. I have to see what Hamzat does. Now, if I really ran the show, I would have already made Hamzat and Adesanya for UFC 293. And I would say, all right, we'll wait until afterwards to see what happens, And even if Dricus loses, then we could make Adesanya Dricus one contenders fight to face Hamzat Chimaev if Hamzat Chimaev were to get the win over Adesanya. And maybe it would be Whitaker and Hamzat next. And maybe then you'd see the trilogy for Whitaker. But I think there are a lot of good matchups at middleweight. Even if it's Whitaker, I get it. We've seen it a couple times. I will still be excited for that because I truly believe that Whitaker's still getting better. I think he's about to put on a masterclass performance over Dricus this weekend. And I do think he did enough last time, even though it was a close fight. But let's get to some other fights. Let's get to Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. Who are you going to be picking in that fight and why?
I have to go Islam Makhachev after seeing that first performance, which admittedly I think a lot of people have a warped memory of, because if you go back and rewatch it, it's actually more competitive than a lot of people remember. That's being said, Islam did win and won the majority of the fight and won. I mean, you could even say he won every second of the fight, but it was way more competitive. A lot of people just think utter domination and finish. It was competitive up until it wasn't. Islam was winning, but it was competitive up until it wasn't. And I do think Charles Oliveira is an excellent finisher and he could get it done. But I just think Islam, for me, going into the first fight, I underrated Islam Makhachev striking. And seeing him go out there and outstrike Charles Oliveira on the feet, see him go in there and outstrike Alexander Volkanovski on the feet, just made me a massive believer. I wasn't a big believer in the striking. I thought he was kind of like, not very good in the striking. I thought he was just a heavy grappler. But now I realize his striking is very technical. It's not, I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's not an Israel Adesanya-esque striking, but it's super technical. And I just think a guy like Charles Oliveira, he has to create those chaotic moments and find a finish. And maybe he clips Islam. Maybe he clips him and finds his chin and finish him. But right now, I just think Islam's too well-rounded. Islam's not worried about the jiu-jitsu of Charles, so he's going to take him down and beat him up on the ground. Islam's striking is super technical, and he's defensively sound, so he's not going to get clipped up by Charles. So where does Charles win in that fight? And I hate to say it because Charles Oliveira is one of my favorite fighters. But I hope we see a rematch. I don't know if I necessarily want to see it right away. I kind of do. The Beneil Dariush fight kind of, I think, reinvigorated people wanting to see Oliveira fight for it again. And I also, again, think people misremember the first fight as not being competitive. But I have to go Islam Makhachev probably by stoppage. I just feel like I couldn't convince myself. There's not enough that I've seen. Beneil Dariush, as I think we've talked about before, I thought Beneil was a bit overrated, and I know people think that's like an insult, but I just thought he was being elevated too highly. And Charles went out there and beat him pretty badly, but for me, it was an impressive win. But Beneil Dariush is no Islam Makhachev. Islam's in the prime of his career, super well-rounded, and I hate to say it, better than Charles Oliveira everywhere. So I have to go Islam Makhachev in a rematch, unfortunately, even though I love Charles Oliveira. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was guilty for overrating the striking of Beneil Dariush. I felt like that was the thing that kind of brought me over the top is, I was picking Beneil Dariush to drop Charles and to finish him and all that. And to be fair, Charles did look like he improved his head movement. Like, I saw a couple of breakdowns, slow-mo breakdowns of Charles Oliveira's slipping punches, trapping hands. And that's something that he's always done. He's always been someone that would trap hands. But to see him being able to slip punches in the fire, that looked like a little bit of an improvement. On top of that, something else that I have to mention is the chin. He did get tagged with a couple of good shots before their first grappling exchange, Charles and Beneil. And think of all the time that Charles had off. Now, before the Islam Makhachev fight, we're looking at a Justin Gaethje war 4 months prior. And before that, we're looking at a war with Dustin Poirier 6 months prior. And before that, we're looking at a Michael Chandler battle. And of course, that wasn't really a war, but Chandler rocked him in that fight. And, he had such a streak where he was just fighting so often. And I think that all of this time off has rejuvenated his chin. Maybe it's just because Beneil Dariush isn't the level of striker as some of these other guys that have caught him. But my argument in the build-up to this fight was that, Charles had this threat of the takedown over a guy like Poirier, over a guy like Gaethje. And, that's something that's always on their mind when, they're in the pocket with this guy. What if he grabs a hold of me and pulls me to the ground? What if he catches me with an inside trip? And I was saying, well, Beneil Dariush doesn't really have to worry about that. And I think that he'll just be fine on the feet. But Charles Oliveira had absolutely no respect for him. And the performance that Charles had over Islam Makhachev, over Beneil, that was what I expected going into the fight with Islam. Like, I thought Charles was going to do that to Islam. Just go out there, no respect for him whatsoever, walk him down, drop him, and sub him. Because we know that if Islam gets dropped, there's no one worse, jumping on your back than Charles. You do not want to be rocked in front of him, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And I think Charles could finish Islam, but it's just like, I just can't see it happening. Even with this rejuvenated chin, Islam is so patient on the feet. He's not Beneil Dariush, and he's got such a tight guard, and he's super defensively sound. I think that KO at the beginning of his career taught him a lesson. And I have a feeling that Charles is going to get it done, but I had a feeling that he was going to get it done last time. And I got to pick Islam, of course. And I think we're about to find out how good Volkanovski really is, because if Islam cleans up Charles, it's going to be crazy.
What?
I was just going to say that we're about to find out how good Volkanovski really is, because if Islam goes in there and just duplicates what he did last time to him, then Jesus, I mean, no one's stopping this man at lightweight, because
that is true. And that's another thing.
Now Charles is a level above everyone else at lightweight. But yeah, go on.
That's another thing. I think Islam is still getting better as well. I think Charles is still getting better as well. That's why I almost, now that I've had time removed from UFC 289, I almost want him to wait. Like, I want Islam to fight a couple more fights, Charles to maybe beat up a couple more guys, and then like late next year, late 2024, then rebook them a couple years apart. And I think it would make it more compelling. But then you never know. And I get it. This is just the nature of MMA. You never know one of them's going to end up losing or falling off a cliff. Tony Ferguson, look what happened to him, and we never got the Habib fight. But I feel like it would be more compelling, like a year from now. Let them each win one or two more fights. Imagine Volk beats Yair, then Islam beats Volk in Abu Dhabi later this year. That's just a matchup off the top of my head. And then Charles beats an Armin Saryukian in the meantime and finishes him. And then imagine the build-up for it mid-next year. Imagine how crazy that would be. So it's one of those things, though, you never know, because you play games like that and then the fights never happen.
Yeah, for sure. I do believe that even though Islam did get the win, and he did it pretty convincingly last time, I feel like it's the hardcore fans version of Conor and Habib. We'll never get something like Conor and Habib again, just because they're just two Goliaths in MMA and very unique people. But Charles and Islam, from just a competition standpoint, and the fact that Charles is just so loved by all the fans, and of course Islam has a very dedicated follower as well that trickled down from Habib, I would be just super excited for it. Even more excited to see that fight than I would be for Volk and Islam, because I do think that Islam would beat Volkanovski in a rematch, and Volkanovski is really good at making adjustments, and I'm not counting him out. For me, it's basically a 50-50 fight. I'm not backpedaling, guys. I know that I said Volkanovski would beat him in a rematch. I think that by the time the rematch happened, Volk's going to be 35. I don't think it would even happen in Abu Dhabi this year. I almost think Volkanovski is like guaranteed going to fight Aljo more than anything else, just because I think Aljo's about to go in there. And I understand that, but think about it like this. If Aljo went in there and completely mopped the floor with Cejudo in the last outing, we'd still be talking about, I can't believe he just fucked up Henry Cejudo. Now, of course, it's Sean O'Malley. It's a little bit different, but you understand that the feeling that we get as soon as it's, time for the pay-per-view and the day after, and we have to talk about it, he's going to be in the headlines. Everyone's going to be talking about Aljo after UFC 292. And if he goes out there and chokes Sean O'Malley out in one, and Islam already has a fight lined up with Charles, for example, for Abu Dhabi that's been announced before, Aljamain's fight with Sean, I could see Volkanovski saying to himself, I want to stay active. Let me take out this, pipsqueak Aljamain Sterling, and then afterwards I'll move up. The one reason why I sort of lean towards Islam is because, again, I think the fight would happen next year, more likely. And I just think that Islam's getting better. Volkanovski 35. I don't know, man. Father Time catches up to most people, and I feel like I'd be banking on something that's never happened, but it is what it is, man. I think I would. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think I would lean slightly towards Islam, but I know how smart Volk is. And he's been saying that as soon as I got outside of the cage, I knew the adjustments that I would make. And every fighter says that. Every fighter's like, I wish I did this. I wish I did that. Islam was probably doing the same thing. So that being said, man, Islam is just hard to deal with on the feet. The guy's a beast, and he has the threat of the takedown over Volkanovski, So who would you pick to win that fight, and why?
So I'd pick Islam Makhachev. I think he'd get it done. I think a lot of people have an inflated sense on how Volkanovski did in the first fight. He did great. He did amazing at UFC 284. But going into that fight, I thought that Volkanovski would make it competitive. I picked Islam by decision. And so I felt like a lot of people were counting him out so much that when he overperformed, it shook a lot of people. And I tuned into your stream a little bit before you did a stream before this. I tuned into a little bit and I heard something I've been wanting to mention it, but I forgot about it until you just brought up Volk versus Islam. You asked somebody, you were talking about the 4th round, and you said, if you were showing this to your grandkids, which fighter would you rather be? And first off, I'd like to say to that, first off, that's not how you score fights on what you would show to your grandkids. But second, I'd rather be Islam Makhachev. I'd rather be Islam Makhachev because guess what? Makhachev got his hand raised. And I just think that Islam in that fight, maybe he came in overconfident. Maybe he came in a little bit overconfident. Volkanovski was counted out by everyone. It's hard not to let that seep into you. You know what I mean? When everyone around you is like, oh, he's going to dominate him, you start to think it yourself. And I think he would not make that mistake the second time around. And with Volkanovski getting older, I think he's I don't think he's necessarily on the decline yet, but I think he's more likely to be on the decline while Islam is on the, I don't even know what you want to call it, incline. And so I would have to go Islam Makhachev in that fight. I think he got it done. I don't know if I didn't hear you say whether definitively. I don't know. Did you score? You didn't score for Volk, did you? The first fight?
Originally I did score for Volk. Like as soon as the fight ended, my score was 3rd round for Volk, 4th round for Volk, and 5th round for Volk. And then for a few months I was running with the the next day I rewatched it and I flipped it. For me, it was the 2nd round for Volk, the 3rd round for Islam, and of course the 5th, the 4th round for Volk as well. I'm someone that is probably the only guy out there that I know of, at least, that has scored the 4th round for Volk. Everyone that scores it for Volk has scored the 1st, the 5th, the 3rd, and the 2nd. You're probably just gonna be arguing with a brick wall like everyone else. If I feel like I've heard every argument against it, and trust me, if you're picking Volk in the 4th round, I understand. All right.
Islam
in the 4th round. I completely get it. But I rewatched the fight a couple of days ago in preparation for my prediction for this weekend. And I rewatched it a couple of weeks ago because I wanted to make a highlight for my TikTok for Volkanovski in the 4th round. And I watched the whole fight and I said to myself, these shots that Islam is landing in the 2nd and 3rd round, even though the strikes are close, he's just landing the better shots, meaning he's landing to the chin of Volkanovski. And Volkanovski was, of course, landing his own shots, but a lot of them were to the body, a lot of them were to the legs. Now, that's great. But because the strikes were so even in those rounds, I felt like Islam still landed the harder shots. And, this is like the first couple weeks since the fight has actually happened to where I'm starting to be like, yeah, I think Islam did enough, So I can see it now. And if you're someone that is fully believing that Islam won the 4th, then you could score at 49-46. Because I could see the 2nd and 3rd being for Islam too, for sure.
I think, I don't remember what I initially scored it, but I'm pretty sure after rewatch, I scored it 1, 2, and 4 for Islam. 3 was 50-50, but I gave it to Volk, and 5 was clearly Volk. And on my rewatch, I thought 4 and 5 were the clearest rounds, 4 for Islam, 5 for Volk. I know a lot of people make a lot about like the shots that Volk landed when he had his back taken.
Yeah.
I completely delete that from the conversation because I thought Islam landed the better shots on the feet prior to that. So even if you want to say, okay, Islam didn't do much. And I'm one that I hear people say all the time, well, he's working for a submission. I'm talking about different fights. It could be any fight. Well, he had his back. He's working for a submission. So they say, oh, I give him the round because of that. People say the heel hook with Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou fight. The same thing is working for a submission. That's code word for not getting a submission. So I do understand the argument that because Volk was at least throwing something, meanwhile Islam was doing nothing.
Yeah.
I do understand that argument, but for me, I just thought Islam outstruck him prior to that.
Got it.
So him outstrucking him doesn't get to basically coincide it with the shots from Volk when he had his back taken.
Because those are those are the significant strikes of the round, the strikes on the feet. And I have tallied them up. Volk landed more, but once again, the shots that Islam was landing, even though Volk landed a couple of head strikes, they were flush jabs and a good left hand, basically. So you still favoring Islam. And that's ultimately why I would pick him again, because again, it's so hard to fight against the threat of the takedown and just not be diminished on the feet. Not only because that's in your head mid-fight, but also because part of your preparation is heavily focused on grappling. And Volkanovski is someone that, really prepares heavily for his test. Well, think about the fights where he's looked his best in the striking. It's when he's been preparing for a guy like a striker. And of course, look at the fights where he's looked a little bit, iffy on the feet. And that's against a guy like Chad Mendes. Now that's way back in the time. Maybe that's not that's way back in the day. That's not a good example, to be honest. But I just think that on the feet, because Islam is so composed and he's so fast and powerful, and he has the threat of the takedown, it's just, I don't see him subbing Volk or finishing Volk on the ground, but it's just, I can't pick him. I can't, even though I know it's going to be close this time. I'd probably slightly lean towards Islam.
Let me ask you this. Before I did this, I was talking to different people like, you guys want to see this? You guys want to see me do a collab with Lucas? And I hear, and I know I've seen this prior to even us suggesting doing this collab, but I hear Lucas says all these delusional things. He has all these clown takes and this and that. And you see, you get a lot of hate. I've yet to hear one yet today, dude. I hear nothing but mostly reasonable stuff. I've been waiting for one. So you don't have any? Come on, where are they at today?
Yeah, exactly. I think that, I appreciate you for bringing that up, man, because I think a lot of the people that like to completely discredit anything that I say are people that don't actually watch a lot of my stuff. Now, for sure, I've had some crazy takes and some awful ones as well. And I'm pretty unapologetic about them when I actually give them, of course. But yeah, man, I know my shit. I'm a fucking big fan of the sport. This is what I love. So at the end of the day, if you really do watch the sport, you're going to know what you're talking about. And plus, I post I'll post little clips on TikTok, and these people are taking me out of context. For example, I posted a video on TikTok the other day saying Volk would be a fool not to shoot this fight. And they're all saying, Volk outstruck Holloway. You're an idiot. You have no fucking clue what you're talking about. And of course, it's a 60-second clip. So they don't hear the other 22 minutes to where I'm also saying, but this and this. So I appreciate that, man. I do appreciate that
I've been waiting for one, man. I'm hoping one pops up. You got to come up with one during the stream.
Yeah. I
wanted to argue about something. I told you beforehand. I said, look, dude, if I start arguing with you, don't take any offense to it. But I just been waiting for one. Sure. There has been nothing.
I mean, again, I think that my most confident pick that we're both going to disagree is going to be Izzy and Hamzat. Because I really do think that Izzy would just get steamrolled in the first round. But I understand that there are people overrating Hamzat, and I've kind of been guilty of it in the past. And I think I've just been watching MMA for long enough to understand that we have to slow our roll when people are getting these dominant wins over certain levels of competition. But the last thing I do want to discuss would be, and you could choose which topic you'd prefer, but McGregor versus Chandler not happening. Tough. What's next for Conor? I feel like that's a really interesting convo because, over the course of this year, I've basically completely changed my perception of Conor McGregor. I always knew he was a bit of of course, he's a wild guy. He's off his gourd at the beginning of the year and last year and the year before. I knew the guy was on drugs. And, I'm not talking about the sauce. I'm talking about party good drugs, of course. I didn't really take him that seriously, but I find myself, and I don't know if Joey, if you were a really big Conor fan when he was on the come up and, he was taken on, okay, maybe not. You weren't a huge Conor fan, but I just don't really give a fuck about Conor that much anymore. The only reason as to why I'm thinking he's important at this point is just because it's good for the sport's publicity and good to grow the sport. But as far as me being excited to see, Conor McGregor perform, I mean, I honestly don't care that much because I think he's done. I really do think he's done. What's your take on that?
Here, I'll give you one of my hottest takes that I've gotten a lot of shit for in the past regarding Conor McGregor. So first off, before I even go into that, my take from the very jump, you can go back and watch a video I have in January. I say this fight will not happen. I have no belief. I have no confidence that this fight will happen between Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. I still have no belief that it's going to happen, at least not this year. It may happen next year. But honestly, I just wish the dude would leave the sport. I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of the MMA media sucking him off for clicks. I'm tired of articles from the MMA media. Conor McGregor says this, and it's just a picture of his tweet. And they put him on The Ultimate Fighter in an attempt to resurrect The Ultimate Fighter. It's getting no ratings. It's doing less ratings than Power Slap did on TBS before it got sent to Rumble. And I said from the very beginning as well, when they officially signed the contracts and they were filming Tough, I said, dude's going to show up just enough to be in the filming of it. He's not going to be an actual coach. They're never going to do the fight. And the point of watching the show, for me at least, when I used to watch it, was you would watch the show, you would watch their interactions, and then you would see the fight like a couple weeks after the show ended or a month after the show ended. Best case scenario, I think the show ends in August, in a month. The fight's not happening till at the absolute earliest. If the UFC gave him a USADA exemption, it would be December. So It makes the show pointless. But the hot take I'm talking about is, and people are going to love this, and I'm curious to hear what your opinion is on this. And this isn't an opinion that I've conjured up over the last year or even 2 years. I believe this was my opinion all the way through the Conor McGregor era that actually happened. I think Conor McGregor is one of the most overrated fighters of all time. That's not to say he's not a good fighter, but if you go through his resume, okay, I understand he beat Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. That's in 2013 and 2014. Those wins are okay. Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway were nowhere near the level that they are today. I don't think those wins count for much. He beat Dennis Seaver to get a title shot. Then he beat Chad Mendes on short notice, okay? Beat Chad Mendes on short notice. Chad Mendes came off the couch to fight him. He was losing the majority of that fight until Chad Mendes gassed and then got finished. Then he KOs Jose Aldo. Don't get me wrong, solid win. But you could make an argument, kind of a fluke, but still you have to give him credit for that win. That's an amazing win. Then he fights Nate Diaz. I know there's a lot of Nate Diaz fan. I'm a big Nate Diaz fan. Nate Diaz is a journeyman at best. Nate Diaz was never the elite of the elite. And Nate went out there on a couple weeks' notice, finished Conor. They rematched. It was a close fight. I thought Nate Diaz won, but even if you want to give it to Conor, again, journeyman. Then he went out there and KO'd Eddie Alvarez. I think this is the best win and performance of Conor McGregor's career. Then he disappears for years, comes back, gets dominated by Khabib, then beats the dead corpse of Donald Cerrone, absolutely meaningless, and then he gets finished by Dustin Poirier twice. I think because of his popularity with the fans, because of his brashness, because of the excitement he brought in the fights, I love his fighting style. I love watching him fight. I think he's super overrated. And now that all he does for the last, 5-6 years, he has no lightweight wins since 2016. Since 2016 is his last lightweight win. That's 7 years ago. And his only win is against Donald Cerrone in the last, 7 years? That's crazy to me. And I think because of his ability to draw clicks, because of his ability to get attention, because of his ability to get mainstream attention, people act like this dude was some magical, mythical fighter. He's just your average, champion, in my opinion. He won 2 belts. He never defended any of them. So I just think Conor, and I felt this all the way through this. I was like, okay, well, he beat Chad Mendes, but it's on short notice. It's not like this is something I'm looking at in retrospect. I felt it in real time. But also, one last thing. I was a big fan when Conor first entered the UFC. When he was fighting like Marcus Brimage and who else was it? When he fought Max Holloway the first time, I was actually kind of a big fan.
Who's the guy that he fought in Ireland?
Diego Brandao.
Brandao, of course.
So my question to you is, first off, what do you think about that take? And also, what do you think about McGregor's resume overall? I mean, it's good, but is it really that great?
Yeah. Anytime you're the first guy to defeat a GOAT, like it's going to be pretty solid to begin with. And of course, he does have that win over Poirier, and Poirier was a solid ranked guy even at the time. And other than that, 7 wins in total at featherweight. That's not really all that great, especially when, the Holloway win, as you said, is overinflated, because I like to say Holloway was a tadpole, like barely out of his father's balls at that point. And he really wasn't shit compared to the guy that we see today. I think that Conor, I think he's overrated as fuck. I think that his skills were solid back then. And, I think that at the time, 2015, 2014, 2016, the guy was like, of course, on top of the world, but it's outdated, man. And at the end of the day, like, Conor wasn't necessarily in and of himself like this, Goliath of a fighter that was completely unstoppable. I think like a lot of people would agree with that, but his career was special. And that's something that we cannot ever take away from him. True. I almost want to make like a whole fucking movie on how special his career is, just because there are so many moments that like, it's just perfect for creating a megastar. Just remove the personality. I get that that's a big influence on how he's such a star. But if you're talking about the way that he beat Aldo, of course, like the fight that he had with Mendes, the adversity that he faced, the schooling of Eddie Alvarez, and on top of that, the perfect adversary in Nate Diaz, there's no one better for beating Conor McGregor than Nate Diaz, because of course he's just Diaz is just a fucking punk. Basically, he's going to be going back with Conor, and that's the perfect adversary for such a confident guy. Diaz doesn't give a fuck, and Conor McGregor, gets humiliated by someone that some people like to talk about as a bum. Oh, you lost to Sloppy Diaz. And then Conor comes back and has an all-out war with him. The guy's career is more special than anyone else's in regards to just magical moments. But as far as his skills are concerned, like, dude, people talk about this guy like you couldn't possibly stand with him on the feet. And they'll bring up like Eddie in 2016, and they'll bring up Aldo in a 13-second fight. And I get it. Those wins are amazing. But like, we're looking at his performances post 2016. I get, you know, Khabib didn't finish Conor super early, but at the same time, people overrate him based on the loss against Khabib. Oh, his takedown defense.
Round. Wow,
such amazing takedown defense. The guy got taken down in Khabib's second attempt in the same chain. Khabib, you know, missed the first attempt and was still on Conor, and then took him down and had him on the ground for the rest of the round. Like, people use that to inflate this motherfucker as well. He got taken down by Mendes. Like, this whole takedown defense thing is one of the reasons why he's overrated again. And of course, Dustin Poirier, the easiest fight of Dustin Poirier's entire second half of his career was the rematch against Conor McGregor. And of course, most of us picked Conor. I don't know if you picked Dustin, but I picked Conor. And like,
I picked Conor at 257. Yeah.
Yeah, 257. And like, man, he did look decent early on, but just the thing that I've been saying about Conor McGregor that is one of the main reasons why I don't have confidence is he just is so terrible as the nail. And I think a lot of people also know that, like, when Conor faces adversity today, because he's made so much money, and it's not completely just linked to the money, but his mindset, he's not that gritty guy that's willing to go through it. And even back in the day, he was getting some of these wins pretty easily. He didn't have to fight tooth and nail against Aldo. He didn't have to really go deep against Eddie Alvarez. And I just feel like if you put this man through a bit of adversity and you're able to last the first few minutes, and I've joked around saying Conor McGregor is the of every fight in the first minute, you know, but what happens after that? And I genuinely think most ranked opponents and even guys outside of the rankings would mash him up and make him look silly. I think that a guy like Jalen Turner smokes Conor McGregor. I don't even think that would be that controversial. I think that Michael Chandler, the only reason why I'd ever doubt Conor's chances or ever doubt Chandler's chances is because of the IQ, the fight IQ of Chandler. But yeah, I feel like Chandler sinks in a couple low kicks on Conor, and they say, oh, Conor's a southpaw, you can't low kick him. That's bullshit. You know, I've seen Michael Chandler fight the southpaw and Dustin Poirier and have success against him. Like, I think Conor's a joke when it comes to the ability to beat ranked guys at this point in his career. And it's like, people are ignoring all the signs. There's millions of signs. It's not only the fights. It's not money. It's everything, you know? And I genuinely, like, don't get me wrong. I do like to talk about Conor because he is a madman. He's entertaining and all this, but the reason why I don't care that much anymore is because I'm not that interested in these matchups where he's just going to get ran through. It's like, I already know what's going to happen.
I couldn't have said it any better. I thought you were going to defend Conor there. I thought you were going to be one of these guys that want Conor.
But I will just disagree on the fact that I don't want him to leave the sport. I still think it's good that he's around a little bit, but you know, I genuinely, I'm not rooting for him anymore.
Don't you think it's embarrassing?
He's not really like rooting for him that much.
Don't you think it's embarrassing? He's like chirping from the sidelines for the last like 5 years. Like, he's basically, I made comparisons. He's basically the Uncle Rico of MMA at this point from Napoleon Dynamite. Like, yeah, coach would have put me in fourth quarter. We would have took states. Like, he's saying, I would have beat this guy. I'd be three division champion.
Yeah,
you know,
he's delusional.
It's just embarrassing, and it's sad because I love watching him fight. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch fight. The way he fights, the way he presses forward, his striking style. But at this point, he's using drugs. He's using PEDs. He's not in the USADA pool. He's talking about everybody, but not fighting. It's just embarrassing. You know, it's just like the guys who try to start a fight and then they're like, oh, hold me back. That's what he is at this point. And I thought at first, I would pick the Conor that fought Dustin Poirier to beat Michael Chandler, but that's not even that guy anymore. He broke his leg. Yeah. And then I've seen over the years, and it's not nothing scientific, but I've seen guys who I've suspected to be on PEDs who then came off of PEDs be a shell of themselves. So I'm also worried, not only did he break his leg, he's been using performance-enhancing drugs for the last 2 years. What's he going to look like when he returns, you know?
Yeah, man. That's another issue. When you come off of the sauce, your hormones come crashing down. And I think that's another, you know, good point that you're making. Michael Chandler, I mean, that's not someone that's, of course, some people suspect he's on something. But anyway, he's always looking like that, Michael Chandler, in the offseason.
Yeah, so if he's been on his entire career.
exactly. He's either always on it, or he's always that guy that's really built. And Conor is not naturally this like massive up, juiced up guy. And I feel like that's almost gonna inflate his already inflated ego, thinking he can just knock someone out with one shot. And Chandler said it best. Conor thinks he's bigger than he actually is. Like, Conor isn't actually this massive dude. And for sure, like if technically in theory, yeah, he's a big guy compared to how he used to be. He's big, right? I'm not going to deny that. He looks fucking hench. But I get what Chandler was saying. It's that, like, that's not really who's showing up on the night of the fight. All that muscle, that's not solid muscle that's going to sit there forever. It's coming right off as soon as he enters USADA and as soon as he makes that weight cut. Conor isn't even that big of a weight. You know what I mean? He's a good size lightweight, but he's not that big of a lightweight. I don't even care about the Conor and Chandler fight that much, just because it's like, if you're going to have Conor come back just because it's a good draw, and, once again, it's good that he's in the sport, and if he does win, hey, at least it's big for MMA, like, whatever, you may as well put him against someone that, has a little bit of a good personality to go back and forth. And I feel like, yes, Chandler's entertaining, but there are a lot of other entertaining fighters. Justin Gaethje's entertaining. And maybe they have the idea that Chandler's fights like a bit of a fool sometimes, and you want to have a good balance of a guy that could get KO'd by Conor, who's also entertaining. And Justin Gaethje is not as much of a fool as some people thought he was. I used to call Justin Gaethje, super overrated. And I think that he's kind of proved me wrong throughout the past couple fights. But either way, I know this sounds a little bit like, we're just beating the dead horse, because we're ultimately going to circle around to Conor not being able to win this fight. But I almost like Max and Conor, just because it's a legend in Max. He's not going to knock Conor out. But at the same time, he probably would put like 500 significant strikes into him after the first couple rounds. So is there a good opponent for him? I mean, I don't know what you do to him if it's not Michael Chandler, because I don't think he's fighting Chandler. I feel like he's just, yeah.
I think they handpicked Michael Chandler as the highest ranked lightweight that they thought Conor could actually beat because of the way Chandler fights. Old Conor, Chandler would have been I don't want to say easy matchup for him, but if you look at the top of the division, would have been the most winnable matchup for him. Honestly, I don't know if the Chandler fight doesn't happen, which I have a feeling it doesn't happen, at least not this year. If they match him up with, if Tony Ferguson beats Bobby Green and they match him up with Tony Ferguson, I'm literally going to vomit. It would be so annoying. But for the UFC, it'd be interesting personalities, and the media would suck Conor off for saying, "Oh, you're giving Tony an opportunity. Oh, he deserves it. Red panty night." They would grovel all that stuff up. But I think
I almost feel like I just want to say this before you continue. I almost feel like it's evil to even have Tony fighting as of now.
Yeah, I agree. But also, I do believe, to kind of circle back to the Ultimate Fighter thing, I do believe Michael Chandler's embarrassed himself more than Conor with this Ultimate Fighter thing, because the way he's groveling, the way he's begging, the way he's doing interviews. Yeah, I believe that Conor is going to fight me, the greatest comeback of all time. And the way he's giggling like a little schoolgirl from getting pushed by Conor. I mean, what kind of grown man does that? Like, oh, he pushed me, I'm going to giggle about it now. I just think Chandler, and he's been doing it for years before the Ultimate Fighter even got announced, he was sucking off Conor. It was one of my first videos on the channel. I was talking about why is Michael Chandler, flattering Conor McGregor so much. I don't even know what it's called, but it was years ago.
Chandler's always been a brown nose for sure.
Yeah, so it's just embarrassing for both of these guys. I think this show was an ultimate failure, and I think it proves it with the ratings. I think it proves it with. It's literally killed off this fight, and I could see Conor saying, and the UFC saying, well, I don't know if they would come out and say the ratings weren't good, but they would say something like, oh, well, we decided to go into another direction. The fans preferred this. We're a company that does what the fans want to see, and they circle in another direction instead of Michael Chandler, which I don't know what it'll be at this point. I don't even know what fight I would want to see. I like the Max idea, but I'm trying to think of another one off the top of my head. I can't think of another one I want to see. I've always wanted to see the Gaethje fight, but Gaethje smashes him, in my opinion, badly. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know who's an interesting matchup.
Yeah, a lot of these fights were interesting. They're just not anymore. And one thing that I want to just mention is that I genuinely think that they should just cancel the show. I mean, who gives a fuck about it, right? The only people that are really watching the show, there are definitely people that watch it. I'm not going to sit here and act like no one watches it, but I don't watch it anymore. I watched the first 2 episodes. And after that, like, it's so bad that I don't even watch the fights, because not only is the show shitty, but I'm also just thinking, wait, all these veterans are winning. Like, these guys weren't necessarily good enough to be in the UFC, even though I think a couple of them shouldn't have been cut to begin with. But either way, the level of talent that they're choosing in TUF is not very good. Like, I feel like, again, the Dana White Contender Series, just keep that. I feel like fans of MMA would much rather see just solid fights. They don't want to have to sift through shit and sift through commercials and these, fake fraudulent moments between guys that don't even want to beef, but just feel like, oh, I have to because I'm on TV.
I'm on the show. Yeah.
Back in the day, it was gritty and it felt like it's too cleaned up and too proper. It doesn't work. TV is already a little bit outdated as of today. I don't know. I think reality TV is just completely outdated. They need to cancel it as a whole. The Dana White Contender Series is where it's at. I feel like I've been saying this for a while and people don't like it, but I think Paddy would have been a better choice for Conor, because at least the way that I think about it is this. Yeah, it's a winnable fight, and I truly think that it's something that he can get done, and people don't like Paddy. So, you have two polarizing fighters. A lot of people don't like Paddy, and they want him to lose. I felt like it'd be better than watching Conor get steamrolled. Like, people think it's disrespectful to put Conor in there with Paddy, and I get it. I get that, but still. I don't think there's a better.
You don't think the fight happens, right?
No, I don't think Chandler and Conor are going to fight. Conor's going to fight someone else for sure, but I don't think it's going to be Chandler. I think he's going to stall it out to the point to where the fans are completely over it. People start telling Chandler to just get past it, and then we're going to hear a build-up for something else. But Conor's using the Ultimate Fighter as just something to stay relevant and sell his whiskey. And hey, good businessman. Conor's a great businessman. Showing up to BKFC to stare down with Mike Perry, like, he's doing that for business. Conor's not just flying out to BKFC just because. He's making a bag from BKFC. And also he knows that if he shows up and does a stare down with Perry, it's going to be good for sales for that whiskey company that he sold. And he's still an ambassador. He still probably gets a cut from them every year. So, yeah. I mean, what fight do you think would make sense for him? Or Chandler? Because I'd also like to see Chandler actually fight someone in the rankings, because at least Chandler is going to give us fun ranked fights.
I would like to see Michael Chandler versus Arman Tsarukyan. I think that'd be a fun fight. I think Conor, if he doesn't inevitably end up fighting him, which maybe he does, I just find it hard to believe, he ruined a large portion of Chandler's career, because Chandler's stock, whether he wins or loses, it's up there. His stock is high. He's exciting. And Conor had him sit out for over a year, brown-nosing him, deep-throating him the whole time, filming a show just to not end up fighting him and then have to fight a guy like Arman. So, Chandler, I wonder if it's going to be one of those things where Chandler's just going to be pissed for years to come and just talking shit about Conor. But for Chandler, I'd like to see the Arman fight. I wouldn't mind seeing the Beneil Dariush fight. I think that kind of makes sense, because Chandler's last fight was the Poirier loss, right? Yep. So Beneil's coming off a loss. Book them for later this year. And then who knows, if Chandler goes out there and gets KO'd by an Arman or Beneil Dariush, then Conor might perk up and say, I want this fight even more now, because he's been KO'd a couple times. But as far as Conor, honestly, I've never really put too much thought into it, because I just don't care anymore. I don't care about the Ultimate Fighter. I don't care about the Wolf tickets they're selling for this fight. I just don't care about any of it. But I think you honestly had the best idea. Book the Paddy Pimblett fight. That's where I believe Conor's skills currently are. That's the matchup to make. Honestly, that's a big fight. That could be a headliner for pay-per-view.
Yeah, man. And again, people don't like Paddy. So it's like, a lot of people would root for him. Now, I'm just going to say this. I understand where the Paddy hate comes from. It comes from the Ariel Helwani situation. And before that, of course, a loudmouth Scouser, people are just automatically gonna be against him, or at least a lot of people.
Also, the way the Ariel situation, Jared Gordon.
Of course, and that's the other thing that I was going to get to, the Jared Gordon reaction of Paddy Pimblett, his ability to just completely tell everyone that doubted his win to just, shove it and all that. And I think that he still gets too much hate. Like, sometimes I just don't understand it. It's been so long since Paddy Pimblett has fought Jared Gordon. I feel like people need to chill out on the Paddy hate, to be honest. He's not that terrible, and at least he's still young. And of course, he's not going to be a champion, but that doesn't mean he can't bring some value to the UFC. It doesn't mean he can't get himself, a couple of good moments pre-fight, and he can't find a submission here and there against guys outside the rankings. I still think Paddy Pimblett is a good addition in the UFC. Do you also think that he gets a little bit too much shit?
Dude, I don't know, because the way he acted, the post Jared Gordon fight was horrible. And then I feel like the reason people dislike him even more, you have the Ariel situation, but I also think it's like they look at Paddy, they look at the opponents he's had, they see he's kind of being protected and he's kind of being pushed by the UFC. And then meanwhile, you see these other guys who are trying to make a name for themselves and they're getting these tough matchups and they're trying to fight up the rankings and they're fighting these tough fights. And then meanwhile, you got Paddy being gifted the easiest possible opponents, not to say they're all easy. And then he's having trouble with them. And then he's claiming victory. And I thought the Jared Gordon fight was a brutal robbery.
Yeah.
And then what really gets me is when I see Paddy's age, and then I think about it in comparison to other fighters. Like when I was looking at Ilia Topuria, I'm like, Ilia Topuria's what, 2 years younger, 3 years younger than Paddy? I'm like, dude, this whole Paddy thing is just, it's dead in the water. I mean, look how much better Ilia Topuria is. And I'm not talking about them against each other, but think about that. To be a couple years younger and be that much better, I don't think Paddy Pimblett is anything more than a personality. I think he's getting by on his personality alone. And I think that's what really makes people annoyed because, especially if you're a hardcore fan, I mean, I'm sure you know this. Do you honestly think Paddy's ever going to become a contender or a champion? I don't think he cracks the top 15. You know what Grant Dawson would do to him at like number 11 or 10?
Grant Dawson probably beats his ass on the feet.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
He would out-grapple him too, but he would probably be. And Grant Dawson's not special on the feet. That's his whole, like, if anything. But yeah.
And it's not like Paddy. It's not like Paddy is 22, like when Charles Oliveira came into the UFC. So I think a lot of people look at him and they're like, oh, he's spoon-fed, he's gifted, all this stuff, when he's not even that good. And I actually kind of like Paddy. I kind of start to dislike him a little bit after the Jared Gordon fight, but I actually don't mind him all that much. I thought he was an interesting personality, but I'm kind of like a purist in a way. Like, I'm sure you've seen – how long have you been watching MMA? I've been meaning to ask you this whole stream.
I've been watching MMA like consistently since 2017. Before that, I did watch Conor McGregor's fights. But the first ever fight that I actually really – like followed the build up to was Jones versus DC, but I am still, relatively new. 2017 is when I really started watching, but yeah.
So you might not have seen it as much. I started watching in 2010. The barrier of entry to the UFC has declined. So like Paddy Pimblett would have never even, he would have never even made the roster. So I think a lot of fans have seen the UFC, and I understand why the UFC is doing it. I think they're just trying to catch guys young rather than having other organizations pick them up. They're almost trying to be a feeder league to themselves. Plus, they have so many cards. But I think a lot of people who've been watching the sport for a while, they see this and they're like, and this guy doesn't even belong in the UFC. He's getting all this attention. You have Barstool hyping him up. You got Dana looking at the Barstool president going like this. I'm sure you saw that clip. And I think that's where a lot of the hate comes from. I just don't think with his current skill set, I just don't see it. I just don't see a rapid improvement. And like, even if he doubled his current skills, I don't think he's competing with the top 10 of the lightweight division. So
no, yeah.
But I do understand though, it is gotten a little bit crazy because the Ariel Helwani thing and because the Jared Gordon robbery. I do think it's a little bit crazy, but I think there's so many factors going into it that I kind of do understand it.
Yeah, no, I get it too. Like, of course, I made a whole video on how delusional Paddy Pimblett was after the Jared Gordon fight. It's just sometimes, and this happens in every sport, of course, there are just so many petty fans that, let's say it's a year removed from Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon, they're still going to his comments to say, you're shit, you're deluded. You know what I mean? I just feel like some MMA fans and, of course, sports fans in general are just so petty. You know what I mean? And I don't like Adesanya. I'm not going to his page to just shit all over him in his comments. Like, for sure, I make a video instead, which might be even worse, to be honest. But still, it's just a little bit different. Yeah, exactly. So maybe I should eat my words there. But still, I think Paddy gets too much shit. It's like, I feel like people should give him a break. He is a good personality. Yeah, the experiment's dead. Like, he has no chance, in my opinion, to ever even get ranked. And there's not a part of me that thinks that we're ever going to get excited for a Pimblett and Topuria buildup. Like, that's done. The ship has sailed. And usually when people have the skill level of Paddy Pimblett, they're kept around and they're on thin ice just because the UFC needs guys that are stepping stones. You need a guy for someone that's coming off of the Contender Series. And normally, that's what a Jordan Levitt's there to do. You know what I mean? But Paddy Pimblett, on the other hand, he's going to get by with his personality. And hey, if he wants to stick it out and just loves fighting, I'd love to see him stick around the UFC, but he doesn't really strike me as a guy that would stick around for that long and be a journeyman in the UFC. So either way, we started this conversation with Conor and Paddy. Before we wrap this up, I just wanted to ask you, let's see, what your worst picks are before we get going and we end the stream. What are your worst picks and ones that you just kind of think were just completely ridiculous?
My worst pick. Honestly, it's hard for me to. I know this sounds almost conceited. It's hard for me to think of bad picks that I have. I have one that I'm going to get to in a second, but it almost like, and I know it's kind of playing both sides a little bit, but I feel like almost sometimes I justify them. Like, I'll give you two that I have off the top of my head. My worst pick ever is Jorge Masvidal over Colby Covington, and I was going Colby Covington the whole time. I started watching tape and I'm like, damn, Colby's striking his ass, and I'm like, Jorge's sneaky good with his boxing, and I'm like, I think Jorge could finish him in the first 2 rounds. So I think I picked Jorge by second round KO. But I did say, and I get it, you're playing both sides. You're kind of sitting on the fence a little bit. I hate doing it, but I'm just saying, I did say if it does get past the second round, I think Colby's going to out-wrestle him and dominate him into wrestling. The other pick I have, and I don't even think this is a bad pick, but I've been getting a lot of shit for it recently. I picked Abus Magomedov. And I know that in hindsight, that seems terrible, but my analysis was I thought Abus was the better striker. And you watch the first round, it's not all that bad of a pick. You know, he was landing, but the gas tank was horrible. I went with the inexperienced guy. It's very rare that I go with the inexperienced guy, you know, the unknown guy over the known guy, veteran who's been around for a while. But outside of that, I can't, at least because I have a hard time remembering every pick I ever made, especially before the channel. Like with the channel, it's easy to remember those picks. But I'm trying to think of one that's just been, I've been super confident. The other one,
I picked Woodley to completely, you know, finish off Kamaru Usman. I mean, but a lot of these picks, again, you go back in time and you like, there are always decent reasons for picking a Charles to beat Islam. There's always decent reasons for picking a Max to beat a Volkanovski. You know what I mean? In the first fight, right? But yeah, like I think that when I think about worst picks, I'm just thinking about a pick that like couldn't go any worse. That was like, you know, a 5-round fight that really played out. And the guy that you picked just got completely battered and had nothing to offer. Whereas sometimes, you know, a Charles Oliveira versus Beneil, yes, it was a bad pick. I'll be honest about it. But like, it only lasted a couple minutes. And at the end of the day, like, I know that Charles can go out there and finish someone real quick and show some improvements. You listen, for people that really do watch tape and make these predictions, like, and you'll know this, you kind of understand that there's always a good chance you're going to get the pick wrong, you know, especially when it's a competitive fight, right? So, but yeah, I'd say, who did you pick for Woodley and Usman?
You know what's funny? I know most people were picking Woodley, so that wasn't even a terrible pick. I picked Usman, and I was confident. I wish there's so many great picks that I had, because if you remember the lead up into that fight, I would say 80% were picking Woodley. Most people didn't even barely know who Usman was. I was very confident. I thought Usman would be able to get it done. That's one of my better picks that I had. Another one that I had that was pretty good, and I'm not a bettor, but I convinced one of my buddy who gambles. I picked Nate Diaz to beat Conor McGregor in the first fight, and it wasn't one of these like shock value picks. Like, I genuinely believe it. You know how some people, and I'm sure you probably did this, especially before you had a channel, where there's some people who are like, oh, this guy's a massive underdog, I think he's going to win, you know, especially when you're not making a video and going out there and saying it. It wasn't one of those. I was confident. I said, Nate Diaz is a horrible stylistic matchup for him. And one of my buddies bet like a couple $100 on him and won like, I think, a couple thousand. I don't remember what the odds were, but that's one of my best picks. But my worst pick is, I think I picked Woodley over Covington, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure.
You mean worst picks? Yeah.
Worst picks. Sorry.
Like, yeah. Man, I have to say, you know, I think I've gotten basically every single one of my Covington picks right, to be honest. I don't think I've ever picked the Covington fight wrong. I know you were talking about like how you're pretty good at reading a Sean Strickland fight. The only Strickland fight I've ever got wrong was Strickland and what's his name? Pereira. I picked Strickland to out grapple Pereira. I was thinking Strickland's got this grappling base, and Pereira got taken down by Michailidis. And of course, Sean Strickland just, you know, he doesn't really want to. I don't know what it is, honestly. Is it just that he thinks grappling is for pussies? I don't know what the fuck it is, because he didn't shoot a takedown.
When I just see this and plotting forward, I'm like, I'm going to Boost. I just couldn't get past it.
Yeah, I understood that. Like, I feel like, you know, Sean Strickland's style is like something that works in that middleweight division, and people are just, it's just a long distance marathon kind of style with him, and he's very defensively sound. It looks so ugly, so it's kind of hard to be impressed by him when you watch his fights back. I mean, I was like, fighting back the urge to, shut off Fight Pass when I was watching Strickland and Jack Hermanson. It was that kind of slow, at least early on. But either way, yeah, I think the Jones and Gane pick for me was pretty bad. At first, when the fight was announced, I went with John Jones because I was like, he has his
James of
wrestling
MMA, right?
Exactly. I was thinking, look, Jones has his wrestling shoes on for Francis. Gane is easier to take down probably because he's lighter. And then everything started switching. And I started to feed off of the idea of Gane being this, like, again, LeBron James, just, Jones is going to get a hold of him and Gane's going to just shuck him off with the most, like, athletic takedown defense you've ever witnessed. It's like, it's like basically a super athlete in their prime, next level. If Gane has all this talent to look this good on the feet, then he'll have the talent to stuff takedowns. But then after the fact, I'm reminded of, who do you look good on the feet against? Tai Tuivasa? Like, is it really that crazy to have a Ciryl Gane build to make Tai Tuivasa look silly? You know what I mean? So I think that was a shitty pick as well. Overrating Gane based on, him finishing Tai. And of course, he didn't really beat Jairzinho's ass that badly, and he didn't really destroy Volkov that badly. I just thought to myself, yeah, that was a bad pick for me for sure.
Well, in my mind, I think of a bad pick, and the reason I was saying, like, I don't really have that many bad picks is because, even though I do, I'm not saying that, is I feel like a bad pick comes from being, like, super confident in it and then just being dead wrong. So, like, a lot of the picks that I've gotten wrong, and I started off really hot this year, and then the last, like, month and a half, I've kind of been, my picks haven't been that great. They've kind of decreased a little bit in terms, but you know how it is, man. Half these fights are 50-50 fights, but there hasn't been one, except one I just remembered, that I've been super confident in, like, I would die on this hill, and then they lost. Petr Yan, Merab Dvalishvili is one that was horrible for this year.
Yeah, I
That's
think
one of my really bad picks.
Yeah, same. I was very confident. I said that Merab was not good enough. I just said he didn't have the skills. He couldn't do it because of the takedown defense of Petr Yan. But even then, it's like, is it that bad of a pick when we literally, no, here's one thing that I've brought up to basically tell myself that, well, actually should have viewed it in a different light, is the fact that Petr Yan's a slow starter, and a slow starter against someone that, like, just has amazing cardio. Yep. It's like, if you never even get going, you're already going to be gassed by the time that you do get going. So that's something that I should have taken into account. But how are we supposed to predict to see, like, the most impressive showing of pace that we've ever seen? Like, what Merab did that night, we've never seen that. Like, failing that many takes, like, that's a sign of just constant fast energy. People can't keep that up. So even that was like, Petr Yan, good takedown defense, and Merab doesn't really hold people down, and on the feet, he's not very dangerous. We didn't know that he was going to come in there looking like a fucking alien with his cardio.
That's very true. So that was probably my worst pick in the last, however, since I had the channel, really, that's probably one of my worst picks that I've had. Because I was so confident in Merab. I mean, not in Merab. I was so confident in Yan beating Merab. I thought it was almost laughable to pick Merab. Like, Merab wasn't really holding down anyone. Yan was out grappling Aljo. I'm like, oh, no way Merab wins this fight. I thought it was crazy anyone picking Merab. Sure enough, he went out there and just put the pace on him. It's unbelievable, relentless pressure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, anyway, we're going to wrap this up. For people that were listening, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Check out MMA Joey's channel. That'll be in the description. And before we close out the stream, MMA Joey, would you like to just leave on any words? Would you like to close up? Or?
Well, thanks for having me on, Lucas. I appreciate it, man. If you guys enjoyed it, let Lucas know. Let me know. If you're watching here, you watch my channel, you don't watch Lucas, subscribe to his channel. And that's pretty much it, man. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate you.
All right. I'm going to end this.